I want to explain to you that everything that I say will be from the point of view of a children's publisher in Brazil. We are a large number of publishers, but actually the main publishing area in Brazil is from children's books. So I have to explain that because it's a little bit different in Brazil. We are very dependent on the government to sell books. We founded the company in 1987, so we have more than 25 years of experience in Brazil. So now we have about 350 titles, and we added how many followers in Twitter and Facebook for you. So because today this is really, really important in the market. Actually, when I checked today, we had more. We have 5,959 followers. So we just changed it here. So it's really a big number, right? And now you know that Brazil is probably you probably know that Brazil is the biggest country in South America. We only speak Portuguese, and it's a huge area. It's almost as big as Canada. So the population is now about 100. Actually, the number is 195 million already, but the census do not show us what it's not complete yet. So that's why we have this number. But one thing that it's important to see that the Brazilian population, it's huge. It's in huge numbers. You can see that from 0 to 14 years old, it's 46 million. I think it's more than the population of Spain. So whenever publishers see that number, they think that we have a huge, huge market. But the people that really read in Brazil, it's a small market. It's really not a big one. So it's important to realize that we have a lot of differences in a lot of problems that should be resolved with education and, well, political wisdom, which we don't really have right now. So what I want to say is that we have to pay attention that the literacy in Brazil. So, for instance, in 2009, 9.7% of people older than 15 years old were illiterate. So 9.7%, it's a lot. So 14 million people. So in 2011, we had 12.9 million people, and those are completely illiterate. So it's not that they know a little bit, or they have not gone to school. And of those, 96% are older than 25 years old, and more than 60 were 50 years or older. So we have a big generation in different areas of the country that have not have access to education. So it's really really a big problem. So most of those numbers are in Northeast Brazil. So the illiteracy rate in Northeast is 16.9. So it's almost the double of the national average. So we can see there's also it's a big divided country in the sense of education. South Brazil has a lot more education, a lot more opportunity, and the Northeast has a more difficult situation. So you can see that then we have something that I don't really know if you use this term, but it's very used in Brazil. It's called functional illiterate. And those we have, this is the government number, so I'm sure it's a little bit more. 30.5 million people are functional illiterate. It means that those people, if you are not familiar with that, are people that know learn how to read. They can recognize the words and the letters, but they cannot decode the written, they cannot comprehend what is written, they cannot follow instructions. So it's a big number, and it really increased from 2009. From now, it was to 20.3%. So this is the biggest problem, because people that cannot understand what they read cannot be readers, and this is what we struggle with. So when you see that you have a huge population, 194 million people, say, oh, that's a huge market, but it's really not. It is quite small in terms of literature. So then you can see that the unemployment rate by region, and you'll see that, well, in Brazil, it was, in 2011, it was 6.7% of unemployment, and you'll see that the Northeast has a bigger number, so 7.9%. It's a big difference, even for us to deliver books to Manaus, is in the Amazon area. It is difficult. We have to send them either by plane or by road from São Paulo to Fortaleza, which is the capital in Northeast Brazil. It's a 4-hour flight, so it's like crossing Canada from east to west. It's really a huge distance. The distribution of wealth in Brazil is also a big problem. There is something called the Gini index. So the closer this number is to 0, so the better of the distribution of wealth. And you can see in Brazil in 2011 is 51.9. In Canada, so by comparison, is 32.1. So in 2005, that's the number I found, World Bank. So it is concentrated. So we have a lot of poor areas and a lot of rich areas. But one good thing is that now some people would call the D class. There will be A would be the richest and E would be the poorest. So the D, as in David, it's really, really growing, and they're reaching, and they're having more opportunity to things that they didn't have before, like owning a house or owning a car or sending their kids to school. Public school is free for all, but we don't have in Brazil schools for everybody. So it's still a problem, and some areas the schools are very concentrated with a lot of students, and some areas like rural areas, I mean, it's a really tiny school by the river with someone that would come once a week to teach the kids. So it's really different from, you would say, from the borders of the Amazon River and to São Paulo, the city. So it's complicated to manage such a huge country with big differences. So related to books, we have a lot of Brazilian book associations. So the National Bookstore Association, the Brazilian Book Chamber, which is probably the strongest publishers. They are not only publishers, so they also have bookstores, distributors, and door-to-door and publishers. So they all have, so they have 600 associates. The other one, the independent publishers, is about 100 associates. The Publishers Union, all publishers have to be part of the union. And actually, the smallest one is the most powerful one. It's called Abre Livros, and they are only textbooks publishers. They used to be only 10 publishers, and it's usually they are the ones that go to the government, and they go to Brasilia and talk to the ministry and decide the programs. Now the last, I guess, 5 or 10 years, they've accepted some smaller publishing houses. But, well, for instance, some company like Callis would not be able to enter the group, because even the smallest one is still a huge publishing house. But it's interesting to know that they really know all about politics and what is going to happen in the government. so that you can have an idea what the publishing market is. We published about 55,000 titles in 2010 and 58,000 titles in 2011, and it's really important to see what the government has in influence, what the influence of the government in that, because the government represents about 37% of all the sales in Brazil. I can give you an example. Our example, in our case, from 2011 to 2012, our bookstore sales decreased 7%, but our government sales increased by 65%. So it's really a lot. It's something that you have to be aware of that, especially with children's books, children and young adults. For people that sell bestsellers in bookstores, this number does not affect them so much, but it's really important to take this into account. The division in Brazil, as you can see here, textbooks. That's the way the people that do the research. They call it Fundação. It's the Institute for Economic Research, and they do it every year. And I only have the numbers for 2000 until 2011. I don't have it yet for 2012. But you can see that textbooks and only went up 4%. General books, it's 1%, and religious books almost went up 20%. But the one that really grew in Brazil, the area where really grew, is STM, scientific and technical books. They grew 34%, which is a really big difference from everything else. And children's books are probably, I'm sure they are included in textbooks, so you cannot really see here what's happening. I just want to explain a little bit what this private company means. There is a bank in Brazil called Itaú, and they launched a program in 2010, and they started buying books. They chose the books and bought the books, and they distributed them freely. So you only had to sign up and say, I want to receive the books, and then they'll send it to you. The idea, at first I don't really remember, it was one title that they chose, but I remember very clearly last year because we participated, and they chose 3 titles to distribute for the population, for the Brazilian population all over Brazil. And of this title, we sold 2,600,000 copies. Of course, the price was really low, but in volume it was a very good deal, and the author was really happy. And so they're starting to do those programs, private companies, foundations, banks, and they think that to be associated to books, it's a very good thing. And so they have a committee to choose the books, to choose the titles, and they decided what they want to do, and you have to deliver them in a specific format or something. I don't know if of any other place that would have such a huge number. It's an incredible work. And for instance, this bank, they have a foundation, so they use the foundation to buy the books. And it was really incredible, and everybody knew. They had outdoors all over the city with characters presenting the books, and the title of the whole campaign was "Read to Your Child." Although Brazil is not huge in reading numbers, we do understand that reading is something important and should be valued. So it's really an important idea to have those companies entering the market for us, for instance, for publishers, to sell to them. Just that you have an idea of how many agencies we have. no, first I'm going to explain you about the government programs. There are already a lot of programs, and it's really hard to keep track of them. I'll try to explain a little bit. So we have the, I'll explain the names later, but so the PNLD, PNBE, and those are federal programs. So they are organized by Brasilia, by the central government, and those are the biggest numbers. Those are the ones that when you sell one title, you might sell 100,000 copies of one title, which is really huge. And the discounts are big, but it's, even though it is worth it. So, and you can see that the programs increased more than 16%. So as you remember that I said that for us, it increased 65%. It's just because we had a lot of books that were selected in those programs. And but in general, it did increase 16%. It's quite an important thing in Brazil, the government programs. So when they say, the researchers, they say other programs, not the federal ones, is because we have municipal programs, state programs. They're, of course, much smaller, but on the other hand, they are easier to participate. It's not easy to participate in those programs. Not that it is something mysterious or not, but there are so many rules to follow that, and the risk is quite big because if you get something wrong. So just for you to have like an idea, what are the agencies? They have the National Library, which is the Biblioteca Nacional. The Ministry, the Biblioteca Nacional, they give you the ISBN. They have some grants for translation. They're not, quite organized. And then they have the Ministry of Education. We call it MEC. We call everything by some nickname. So Ministry of Education is called in Brazil MEC. And they are the ones that choose the books for those programs that I showed you before. Then there is the Ministry of Culture, MINC, we call MINC, and they are more associated to the National Library. So then this is just at the federal level. Then you have the state level, and you have a state secretary and a cultural secretary. Also, so the secretaria, what we call it, is kind of an agency. So they will buy some books, and then they have the educational secretaria, which means that some small city might have both. Some small state will have both together, the education and culture. And then the municipal education agency, and then the municipal cultural agency. So there are all those regions and hierarchy for the government. But you can have some municipal programs. They're very, very good. They'll buy probably, well, at best, they'll buy 6,000 copies of one book, and then in a smaller numbers, they'll buy 300 copies of one book that they have selected. And for us as publishers, it's kind of complicated because we have to visit them all to show the books. In the case of the federal program, there is an opening of, we called éditeur, will be like a bidding. They open the program, and then you have to submit the titles. But in the case of the state secretary, or the state agency, it's better said, right? The state agency or the municipal agency, they choose from your catalog, and so sometimes you don't even know that you are being chosen, or if you have your book is going to be selected. So all your books in the catalog have to be prepared for everything, and also you have a lot of forms and prerequisites that you have to have. For instance, there are some, you have to fill all your taxes in order, a lot of bureaucracy that it has to be in order all the time. So in Brazil we have a lot of, I'm trying to find the name, I forgot about it. You have a lot of, we call it SICAF. It's kind of a ID for the company that tells you that you don't owe anybody anything, and you have paid your employees the right amount. And so you have those all certificates that show that you are in order with the government. So if you forget to renew one of those certificates, then you're not eligible to sell to the government. You might lose a big sale, and that's not so difficult to forget that, because one certificate will be renewed in 30 days, the other one in 10, and the other one in 3 months. So you really have to keep track of all those to be okay, to be able to participate in the government program. So when you see a children's publisher that sells to the government, you can be sure they have all this in order, otherwise we lose sales, and it's really quite important. So why they publish books? So what they say is to ensure the quality of textbooks distributed in public schools, and they started in 1997. And so it doesn't matter if the government changes. The program still remains the same. So since 97, they started that program. This is called National Textbook Program. So this is the biggest one. And no matter if it's one party or the other, the program still continue. And the way that they put it, it's kind of a state premise. So it's a state proposition. So it doesn't matter who is running the country, the program will continue, maybe in a smaller amount or a bigger amount, and so it is quite important for us to have it. But it's also kind of complicated to work with that, because then you have a really, really powerful client, and so they have strict requirements. You have to, whatever you present, for instance, when you present a book to the government, if it's a paper that has 120 grams and then a special kind of cover, if they choose this book, it's different than the Mexican program that they change the whole book to adapt their needs. And the Brazilian government, when you show them the book, you have to deliver the book exactly what you have submitted. And for us, for instance, we already have received some reprimand letters saying that they weighted the book and there was some minimal change, and I didn't have a fine because it was not big enough of a problem, but I had to write a letter explaining why this was changed. And we found out was the weight of the different treatment of the cover that made it make the book weight a little bit more, because you can see that they only think about millions. They're working with millions of books, and so they do have a lot of worries if you decided to change from 150 grams to 120 grams of paper. You'll change the whole prediction of the logistic distribution of those books. So that is one of the problems, and they also influence a lot of publication choices. So if you are a publisher and you are in a children's book house, and you'll think about, is this book going to be selected by the government? This is probably going to be one of your concerns, because it's a big difference if the book sells 3,000 copies or if it's going to sell 100,000 copies. And also, when you are selected by the government and you sell 100,000 copies, then the book gets better known by teachers and more people in Brazil, and then you'll probably sell more in regular sales channels like bookstores or other channels. So it is, you have to think sometimes that you're choosing the subjects that the government wants to buy. So this is something that, for instance, in Mexico, sometimes they wait for the government to choose and then they publish the books. Here in Brazil, we don't do that, but we always keep in mind that this book should be a good book for the government or not. If not, we have to think about that. So, and we are very dependent. If for instance, the government decides tomorrow that they're going to close the program, I'm sure many publishing houses, especially the ones that do only children's books, they'll go bankrupt, because this is a big client and we are accustomed to it. Low prices. We do have to sell the books at a very low price, and it's worth it because it's a big quantity. And you can always say that you don't want to sell this book. They send you an offer for the book, and you might say, no, for this price I don't want to sell. You try to negotiate. You negotiate probably 2 cents or 3 cents of real, but even though you have a lot of requirements to fulfill, that depending on the book, it might not worth it, and you have to think about that. For instance, now they want us to deliver what we called MacDaisy. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but it's a program for the blind. So you deliver the book, and then you have to deliver this CD with the book in this program called MacDaisy, and the blind will be able to hear it. It's a special program. This is not expensive, but the expensive thing is that we have to put a label in Braille on top of the CD. And then in this year, for instance, actually last year, there was no negotiation. So you either accept it or deny it. And of course, most of the publishers accept it, and we consider that that part of the program that was in Braille or in MacDaisy, we didn't earn anything. It was at cost, but we earn on the books, on printed books that we sold. So, and then and long negotiations. By the time they open the program, you submit the books. I'll show you later step by step, but it might take a whole year. Sometimes they stop a program for some reason and they reopen it in the next year. So you have to be aware of some of the programs are really, really long. It might take, for instance, the federal programs takes a whole year negotiation. So I just want to interrupt this talk about the government to talk to you a little bit about the digital books, because the government is thinking about digital. Now I cannot enter any book, submit any book to the program that I don't have the rights to have digital. So I have to show them the contract, and in the contract must have a clause that says that I would have the right to publish the books as an e-book format or any digital format that they might require. But even that, you can think about that. Then you might think that Brazil has a lot of digital content, or it's a digital opportunity. And right now you can see that people that know about digital books, of those that were interviewed, only 30% knew about it. 25% have never heard of it, but would like to know, and 45% have never heard of a digital book. So and I can tell you for our experience, we have 120 digital EPUB books, and it doesn't have even a percentage to represent how much we sell. It's really, really low. And then you can see that how many e-books, one of the other questions that they've asked is, how many e-books have you read? and you can see that it's very little. For instance, from 11 to 15 books, only 1%, and more than 15 books was 2%. So it's really, really low what is being acquired of e-books. It's funny when people say, "Oh, this sales in e-books increased by 300%," but then it was one book, and now they have 3, and so it's really, really low. So people don't usually use that as a, but everybody is getting prepared. All the publishers in Brazil are getting prepared and having digital content, because at one point the government is going to buy digital books. It'll probably be cheaper for them. They don't have to distribute it in such a huge country, and but they haven't decided yet what would be best. They bought some tablets, and Amazon is already here. The Kindle is not here yet. Samsung, Motorola, they have all Android tablets. Apple is here. Google is here. So all those big companies are here, and now they are trying to, because in Brazil books do not have taxes, none whatsoever, and they are trying to pass a law that would consider an e-reader as a book, so compared to a book, so it doesn't have taxes, because right now the taxes make the e-reader too expensive for everybody. So once they don't have taxes, it might be an acceptable price, but still is now. Qu'au is here in Brazil. They have a partnership with a huge bookstore called Cultura. It's one of the best bookstores in Brazil. So it is a big thing happening, but I would say that not yet. So going back to the government program, to give you an idea of how this really works. So, for instance, this is the federal program. So the official announcement is generally in January. I can remember a few years ago, they announced on the week between Christmas and New Year's Eve. And I remember that many publishing houses decided not to go on to cancel vacation, because everybody closes between from Christmas to New Year's Eve, and they decided to cancel because they had to prepare what they are going to present on the government program. We don't know actually what kind of subjects they are going to ask before receiving that program. It's called edital. And it's an official document. But we all know that 1 year is for very young readers, and the next year is for young adults. So, for instance, now in 2013 or beginning of 2014, it's going to be for young adults. So everybody's preparing juvenile books, and because we know that's going to happen. They have 1 year for children, 1 year for young adults. Then you have some time to register and submit your books. You'd have to show the books, not many copies, maybe 5 or 10 every year, it depends. They will evaluate the titles. The announcement of the selection, it will be in October. I don't know if some of you have worked with the Mexican program. In the Mexican program, they have 2 times of selection. They have one that is a pre-selection, and then a second one, which is the final one, and the books are really selected. In Brazil, it's only one, but then you have to present documentation, and they'll give you 20 to 30 days to do that. And I'm not sure if you work with a Brazilian publisher that have one of your books selected, and they might ask even if I have a Canadian book that I bought rights and I presented that book, it was accepted, they might ask for the contract of the Canadian publisher with their author. 1 year they did that, and it was really complicated to explain to a foreign publishing house why I needed the contract that they have with their author, because of course this is also a matter of non-disclosure of some things, but it was something that they did not agree, and we had to show. And well, fortunately, the publishers, international publishers that we were working at the time, understood and sent us the contract, and we also had to translate everything. Everything in Brazil, by law, has to be translated to Portuguese, and it has to be an official translation. You cannot submit any document in anything but Portuguese. That's why I say that we only speak Portuguese. So then you send all the documentation. By then, you don't know yet how many books they want to buy. So after that, they'll give you the number. After the documentation, they'll give you the number. And then, for instance, they want 58,000 copies of this book. And they'll give you, I'll pay you, I don't know, $2 for that, for each, which is great. And you can negotiate, but you'll do something like 2 cents, 3 cents, not much. You can always say, I do not want to participate. We are always afraid to do that, because if you do that, we think that we might not get selected next year. I don't know if this is true or not. And then there is the delivery of books. It's complicated because since it's a big amount of books, we have to send someone to Brasilia to, so the books are by, of course, they go by truck and in pallets in a special way that they give you all the explanation of what you have to do. And you have to have someone accompany the books to make sure that they arrived safely and they received it completely. And then they'll pay you maybe 45 days or a little bit more sometimes after they received the books. So it is a long process and not very easy if you're not familiar with it. For instance, I know of a publishing house that once they decide what book they want a stamp on it, a stamp saying that this book was for the federal government program and by the Brazilian government. And they change which stamp, what kind of logo they want. And we have to wait for them to give us this logo, and then we'll give it to them in a printed book. We'll just glue it in so they can approve the location of the logo on the cover. There was no exact rule to do that. And I know of one company that had sold 30,000 copies, and someone at the company changed the logo for the older version. And they had to to dispose of the 30,000 covers and reprint them. So it's really complicated to do and risky. You really have to be careful. So you can have an idea of complementar means to complement. It's not literature. It's PNLD is the name of the program, and it's complementar because it will be a support text. It doesn't have to be literature. It doesn't have to be a textbook. It's something to complement, to increment, to increase, or to make it better, the school program. So they chose 50 companies. They selected 90 titles, and the subjects were science, language, math, and nature. They can specify sometimes. We want poetry. We want books on ecology. They'll give you an idea what they really want. And for instance, every company is allowed, depending on the program, but the federal program, we are allowed to submit 15 titles per company, so including all the subjects. So what big companies, what they do, is actually many companies do, is they have other companies. So if one company buys another, they keep them separately in order to have different IDs. So because they consider company the ID number, the company ID number. So it's something that they'll have. It'll be easier for them to participate. So like a big company would have 3 different imprints, but those imprints would have a fiscal ID and then the government can recognize them as a different company, as a separate company. And so it will be easier for them to submit more books, because you can imagine that a company that has 2,000 titles can submit 15, and we that have 300, we can submit 15. So in one way, it's unfair to the big companies, but we are very glad for it, because smaller companies can participate, and they'll have a chance. So it is something that this happened maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that they decided to have more diversity, and that's why they put there. And it actually is very good. So to give you the name of the program, so maybe even Brazilian companies don't know exactly the name. So, but it's important to have an idea what you have. So PNLD is a national program of textbooks. PNBE is a national program for school libraries, and FNDE is the National Fund for Education and Development. Those are all part of the Ministry of Education. Some vocabulary that, of course, a textbook, you know, it's livro didático, but we have some terms called paradidático. This is support textbooks. It's a book that deals with something regarding school education or the school program, but is not exactly prepared to do from levels 1 to 5. It's just one theme or one subject that will help students understand, I don't know, water or waste or energy or some other theme or subject that might be interesting for the school. And then what is supplemental collection is something that the government feels that might be interesting for the school to have. And they all have different quantities. The quantities depend on what the government needs, what they need to have. And it can vary a lot. So it's hard to say what's best. Of course, the textbook program is the one that is big. This is the one that when they sell one book is always in the area of 1 million. So when they buy dictionaries, they buy, we probably have 3 or 4 companies that sell dictionaries in Brazil. They'll divide the program among those 3 or 4 companies. And when they buy books for the teaching of math, they'll have to have levels from 1 to 6, and they'll probably choose amongst the companies that sell textbooks. This is that association I told you about. It's called Abre Livros, is the Textbooks Association. They really are the big companies in Brazil. So what is really the Brazilian opportunity? I think pros. We do have a stable democracy, although we had some riots lately, and a lot of people are against the government, the actual government. But we have the right to have riots, so it is still a democracy. It is unified because we all, you can travel to the country. We will see the same thing all over all of Brazil. It is stable, as stable as we can get in those days. We are growing, and we do have a lot of cultural diversity. In São Paulo, there is the biggest Japanese population outside Japan. We also have the biggest Lebanese population. Everything is, the numbers are huge. And I remember someone telling me that they have, they want to make videos for advertising. And they say that Brazil is really good to do that because we have people from all over here. So the country is really very diverse, and you can see that. And there is, of course, a digital opportunity because it has not started in Brazil yet, so it is an opportunity. What is complicated in Brazil? We do have high production costs. We have uneven development around the country. As I told you, the difference between Northeast and South Brazil, it's really very different. uneven wealth distribution, of course. This is changing, but not fast enough. Excessive bureaucracy. It is very hard to open a company in Brazil. In Brazil, to open a company, it takes an average of 119 days. So it is really complicated. If you know, in Canada, it takes 5 days to open a company, and New Zealand 1 day. So it is really bureaucratic. And also, for instance, the government programs, you have to translate everything. You have to give them so many certificates. There are a lot of steps on doing any program or anything that you want to do. The fiscal area in Brazil, it's really complicated. We do have electronic invoice, but even though it's not that easy. And of course, we have large geographical distances. For us to send a book to Manaus, it might take 3 or 4 days, which is too long. And I'm sorry, 3 or 4 weeks. I said it wrong. 3 or 4 weeks, and one time we almost lost an event because the truck was stopped for some reason, and it arrived on the day of the event. So it's not. It's probably easier to send them to Miami than send it to Manaus. It's not. And then, how to work in Brazil? You do have to. Well, my advice would be, my humble advice would be to really respect the local knowledge. We do things a little bit different. There is a time to do everything, and sometimes we have to rush. The whole structure of Brazil, it's complicated, but there are things that do work really well. And of course, it's very good to try new ideas, but check with people here or a partner here if those ideas, their opinion of that, if they might work or not. I know about people that want to propose new things in Brazil. We have a tendency to, when people in Brazil accept something, that thing becomes Brazilian. So, for instance, Volkswagen, which is a German car, it's really, really considered Brazilian. Nobody even remembers that it comes from Germany. So once you have an idea that works in Brazil, it becomes part of the culture. So people really accept novelties, accept new ideas, but it's good to talk to people here and understand what they have to say. And the other thing, of course, is to be patient. As I told you, it takes a long time to open a company here, and there's some bureaucracy. For instance, a foreigner can have a company, but they need to have a representative that was born in Brazil. So you would have someone, if you decided to transfer, for instance, your company to Brazil, you'll need someone that is Brazilian to legally represent you here. So there are some small things that are really complicated, but not so much. It's not impossible, of course, but you really have to understand that and not try to work with the knowledge from your country and try to transpose it here, because that doesn't really work very well. So I guess that's it. And if you have any questions now, I'm glad to answer them. Thank you.